Eric Barlow, sheep, and your money. I really couldn't make any of this up if I tried. Here we go. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to another stupendous installment from very high above all the puerile and insipid forms of Wyoming mainstream media. This is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Saturday, the last Saturday before the Wyoming legislative session kicks off. As has become tradition on Cowboy State Politics, there always seems to be a big story or big-ish story right before I hop in the car and head down the road to the middle swamp. It's almost as if these rotten redcoats can't help themselves but participate in my tradition. It's absolutely true. One session, a whole bunch of them took a bunch of money from Pfizer and the Wyoming medical lobby before going to Cheyenne to vote on a whole bunch of vaccine-related stuff. And some of them took more money from Pfizer after they had voted on all of those vaccine COVID-mandated things. But every year, it seems like there is some big story that pops up right before I've got to load up and head out. This time around, it's Wyoming Senator and candidate for governor Eric Barlow. And I have to tell you, my friends, it delights me to no end that the story comes from the Open Range Record. Not that long ago, Eric Barlow set up a nonprofit called Laudable Prairie. What a stupid name. Anyway, the whole point of it was to get locally sourced goods, vegetables and meat into the hands of needy families. Now, you can get vegetables just about anywhere, but locally sourced meat? Now, that's a little bit more difficult, especially when you're talking about lamb and yak meat. Barlow took taxpayer money to fund this little operation, and guess where they got the lamb from? Eric Barlow. This whole Laudable Prairie thing is a 501c3 nonprofit, and it would be totally okay if Barlow gave his prized gourmet lamb of Wyoming to the nonprofit for free. But Eric Barlow didn't do that. Nope, he sold it to him, albeit with a little bit of a discount. You see, the whole deal was the nonprofit would pay 80% of the going rate on the lamb, and then the other 20% Barlow could claim as a tax write-off. Oh, and at the time, he was sitting on the board as the secretary of Laudable Prairie. All the while, he's a Wyoming senator. I told you, I can't make this stuff up. All of this comes from a great article on the Open Range Record entitled Barlow's Nonprofit Bought His Lamb with Your Money While a Senator and a Board Member. Before I even get into this, there's a really important distinction to be made. Laudable Prairie, what a stupid name, is not a private nonprofit. It took public money in the form of American Rescue Plan dollars. None of this would be an issue if Laudable Prairie was funded entirely by private dollars, but it's not. It's funded by tax dollars, at least partly. If all of it was private money, then it wouldn't be an issue where or from whom they got their lamb. They could do anything they wanted with their cash. But when it's taxpayer money, that is a different issue altogether. And when you're a sitting Wyoming senator and you are taking taxpayer dollars to enrich yourself, that's a problem, especially when you're on the board of this organization. Kind of makes you wonder what he'd do with your money if he ever became governor, doesn't it? There's one other distinction that I want to make before we get into the meat of the piece, and it's actually mentioned in the article on the Open Range Record. Again, there is a world of difference between a private nonprofit and one that takes public money. From the Open Range Record, quote, "The Wyoming Hunger Initiative, associated with First Lady Jenny Gordon, has also awarded grants to the Edible Prairie Project. However, the Wyoming Hunger Initiative is not a state agency and does not receive legislative appropriations. According to the Buck Rail, it was funded through donations and partnerships, and in 2024 transitioned into an independent nonprofit." So definitely not the same thing as Barlow's Edible Prairie Project. In other words, Jenny Gordon did it the right way. Eric Barlow did not. And as it relates to Wyoming's First Lady, I have tremendous respect for Jenny Gordon. We're all from Buffalo, and we all know each other. She has always been very nice to me, no matter how vocal I've been about the governor. Eric Barlow and his stupidly named nonprofit are not even in the same ballpark as Jenny Gordon. All right, let's talk about Barlow. With all of these things, you have to follow the money. From the Open Range Record piece, quote, "On May 29th of 2025, DFS announced the Forward Contract Pilot Grant Program as part of the $2.4 million Food Security System Implementation Project. DFS listed 8 recipients, including Edible Prairie, sharing $322,705 in pilot grant funds. DFS stated that the program is administered by the Food Works Group, which distributes these funds statewide, and significantly, quote, "This project is paid for with funds from the American Rescue Plan Act and the Infrastructure and Jobs Act." And so the funding pipeline is pretty clear here. ARPA dollars go to the Wyoming legislature. They hand it off to DFS, which in turn writes a check to the Food Works Group, who then puts it in the hands of Edible Prairie. My friends, this is not a private charity. It's a government-administered federal relief funding program. And we left off one little piece of this whole funding pipeline. Edible Prairie then purchases meat from Eric and Kelly Barlow's company, Gourmet Lamb of Wyoming. In an article put out by this group called Homegrown Stories, who, interestingly enough, has ties to the Powder River Basin Resource Council. It's been a long time since we've talked about those folks, but Eric Barlow was very involved with them during the coal bed methane boom in Campbell County. But in that piece from Homegrown Stories, it literally says, quote, "EPP, Edible Prairie Project, received a portion of the $322,000 state food grant specifically to increase local protein, such as lamb, in food baskets. EPP," and listen to this part very closely, "EPP acts as a mission-driven bridge that uses private donations and grant funding to purchase products from local producers like Gourmet Lamb of Wyoming or Eric Barlow." If you read the piece on the Open Range Record, here are the broad strokes of it. That there was a nonprofit receiving ARPA-backed state grant money that was created, at least in part, by Eric Barlow. That he's a sitting lawmaker and was on the board of the Edible Prairie Project while sourcing food from his own private business. Now, Eric Barlow did resign from that board position in December of 2025 after he announced his run for Wyoming governor. But that was after all of the sheep buying was happening. And here's the icing on the cake. The ARPA framework was approved while Eric Barlow was the Wyoming Speaker of the House. But this whole thing is exactly what irritates voters. That a person in a position of power, an elected official, creates a system and then figures out a way where he can benefit from it. Now, maybe we could say that Eric Barlow did all of this with the best of altruistic intentions. But there are a ton of people in Wyoming that raise sheep. There's a whole bunch of them that live in Campbell County. Eric Barlow, being a former veterinarian, probably knows all of them. But he didn't go to them to source the lamb for his nonprofit. He went to himself. And that, my friends, tells you everything that you need to know about this story. Well, that'll about do it for today's installment of Weekend Update. I realize this is kind of a quick hit today, but I've got to get on the road and head down to the Middle Swamp. For now, from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Studio, I'm David Iverson, and this is the one and only Cowboy State Politics.